I'm a Winter Park resident, and my nanny is missing. This is what's unusual. Is her purse is here.
Okay.
Her car's gone, her purse is here, and nobody's heard anything from her since 11.
The call sets.
On the morning of September 27, 2017, the suburban calm of Winter Park, Florida, held its usual promise of routine comfort. The neighborhood radiated the kind of safety that can lull its residents into believing that danger is always far away, always somewhere else. For Jennifer Fulford, a 56-year-old nanny and personal assistant known for her reliability and warmth, the day began like countless others. Jennifer had built a life defined by purpose and care. She was the quiet engine that kept the household of her employer running smoothly, getting children ready for school, managing appointments, and knowing each preference or routine by heart. Her dedication was evident not only in how she worked but in how deeply she was trusted. She was steady, dependable, and gentle. A person people felt immediately at ease with. Nothing about that Wednesday morning hinted at the horror that would soon unfold. Sometime after the children were off to school, a knock sounded at the door. It was the sort of interruption anyone in a home might hear. Perhaps a delivery, a contractor, or a neighbor asking a quick question. For a woman as conscientious as Jennifer, answering the door was simply another small act in a day full of tasks. But when she opened it, she did not find a friendly stranger or a harmless solicitor. Jennifer Fulford, a nanny in Winter Park, Florida, was first reported missing via a concerned 911 call after she failed to pick up a child. Her employer reported her missing, citing her unusual silence, and the desperate search was compounded by the tragedy of her missing a trip to meet her newborn grandchild. Tragically, surveillance footage of Fulford leaving a dental office was the last image of her alive before her body was discovered 3 days later in a wooded area, revealing that she had been stabbed, strangled, and had her limbs bound. When she opened the door, she didn't find a friendly stranger or an innocent lawyer. Standing in the doorway was Scott Edward Nelson, a 45-year-old homeless man with a long and violent criminal history, recently released from federal custody and living in precarious circumstances. Nelson had broken into the house. When Jennifer didn't show up for her usual responsibilities, her anxiety grew rapidly. She wasn't the type to forget appointments. She didn't disappear without explanation. Her absence was a red flag. Police discovered signs of a struggle in the home. The lack of forced entry at first suggested confusion, but the disorder inside made the truth clear. Something violent had happened.
I wasn't particularly happy with this. Sure. See, these people in Winter Park, for instance, right? They have everything but they have beautiful homes and beautiful cars and golf courses. I'm walking down the street while all these rich people are walking around buying jewelry and they're having their good life and all this stuff. I wouldn't give a rat's about me.
Investigators soon located her car in a Publix parking lot. Inside was a collection of incriminating evidence, clothing, objects, and other materials directly linking to the person seen in surveillance footage at the ATM. DNA analysis would later provide the definitive connection. Scott Edward Nelson had been in Jennifer's car. He had been in control. Meanwhile, Nelson, now aware of the tightening noose, fled to Jacksonville by train, attempting to vanish into another city. But his escape was short-lived. With evidence stacking rapidly and witnesses coming forward, authorities quickly tracked him down and arrested him. The case against him was not merely strong, it was overwhelming. When the trial finally began in June 2019, it became clear that Nelson was not simply facing justice, he was attempting to perform for the courtroom. His behavior oscillated between arrogance, hostility, and bizarre theatrics. One of the most disturbing moments occurred during opening statements. As Jennifer's family listened in grief to the details of her final hours, Nelson turned toward them and winked, a gesture so callous that it stunned even seasoned courtroom observers. Throughout the proceedings, Nelson clashed repeatedly with his attorneys and with the judge. He interrupted, argued, and attempted to dominate the courtroom just as he had tried to dominate his victim. He seemed determined that if he could not escape punishment, he would at least control the spectacle of his downfall. The trial itself was punctuated by external disruptions as well, a power outage and a separate incident involving smoke that required partial evacuation of the courthouse. The strange series of interruptions only heightened the sense that the entire process was taking place under a cloud of darkness and disorder. In an instant, the quiet order of the home collapsed. Jennifer, who had spent her life offering stability to others, suddenly faced someone who thrived on chaos. In a move that defied all strategic logic, Nelson insisted on testifying in his own defense. His words provided no comfort, remorse, or explanation rooted in humanity. He admitted to killing Jennifer. Nelson subdued Jennifer with methodical efficiency, binding her wrists with zip ties, restricting her movement, and asserting total control. Evidence later indicated that the struggle was swift but violent, a sudden eruption of fear inside what had moments before been a sanctuary. What followed inside the house was terrifying and brutal. Nelson wrapped her in a comforter. Perhaps he intended to muffle sound. Perhaps it was to hide her from view while he planned his next move. Or perhaps it was simply an extension of the domination he sought to impose. He then forced her into the trunk of her own car, transforming an everyday vehicle into a prison bound for an unknown destination. For most victims, captivity is not just physical but psychological. The trunk would have been dark, cramped, and suffocating, each bump in the road a reminder that she was no longer in control of her fate. Nelson did not flee in panic. Instead, he followed a cold, calculated plan. His first stop, an ATM. Security cameras later recorded him withdrawing $300 using Jennifer's bank card. While this withdrawal was taking place, Jennifer remained confined in the trunk, surrounded by darkness and the smell of gasoline and metal. Perhaps she hoped that once Nelson got what he wanted, money, he would release her. Many victims cling to the belief that compliance will be enough to survive. But Nelson wanted more than cash. The $300 he withdrew became a grim symbol of how cheaply he valued another person's life. Nelson drove Jennifer to a vacant, wooded field, isolated, quiet, unnoticed by the world. Here, surrounded by trees and sky, Jennifer fought for her life. Several witnesses later recalled hearing her voice. She pleaded with him, a purely human response to inhuman cruelty. In those moments, she was not just a victim in the abstract, she was a living woman making a final effort to be seen, to be heard, to survive. Nelson did not waver. He wrapped duct tape around her entire head, an act both horrifying and deeply symbolic. It was meant to silence not just sound but existence. Still, even this was not enough to satisfy his violence. He stabbed her 7 times, leaving her body bound and abandoned in the woods. Jennifer Fulford's life, a life spent nurturing children, supporting families, and carrying the quiet dignity of kindness, was extinguished over a stolen car, a bank card, and a criminal's desire for control. But instead of expressing regret, he deflected blame onto his probation officer, painting himself as a man pushed to desperation. He described Jennifer as collateral damage, as if her life had been a meaningless byproduct of circumstances beyond his control. For those who knew Jennifer, for anyone who valued human life, the phrase was chilling. It reduced her decades of love, labor, and kindness to a disposable footnote in his self-serving narrative. The most shocking twist came during the penalty phase. With the guilty verdict already delivered, the jury now faced a monumental decision. Should Scott Nelson spend the rest of his life in prison, or should he be sentenced to death? Nelson addressed the jury directly. He did not beg for mercy. Instead, he declared himself a homicidal maniac. He told the jurors he wanted the death penalty. It appeared to be one final attempt to wrest control from a system that had finally cornered him. By asking for death, he transformed the proceedings into a perverse stage on which he played the role of a man embracing his own destruction. Some speculated he wished to portray himself as a monster, perhaps believing that the notoriety or the finality of death row offered a twisted sense of legacy. Others believed he was simply trying to manipulate the jury. But in Florida, the law requires a unanimous recommendation for death. Despite Nelson's wish, at least one juror refused to grant it. On July 11, 2019, the judge sentenced Scott Edward Nelson to life in state prison without the possibility of parole. It was not the sentence Nelson had asked for, but it was the sentence that allowed Jennifer Fulford's family the certainty that he would never again walk free. Instead of becoming the martyr he seemed to imagine himself to be, an inmate on death row, a man who chose his own fate, Nelson was condemned to live out his years behind concrete walls and iron bars. No stage. No audience. No final performance. Only time, isolation, and the memory of what he chose to do on a quiet September morning. In the end, true crime stories risk centering the villain. They risk giving attention to those who destroy rather than those who build. But Jennifer Fulford's life deserves more than being overshadowed by the man who ended it. She was a woman who dedicated herself to service, to care, to being a steady presence in the lives of others. She was reliable not because she had to be, but because she wanted to help people. Her life touched families, children, colleagues, and friends. Her absence left an irreplaceable hole. Those who knew her described her as compassionate, gentle, organized, capable, someone who made life easier for everyone around her. Her story is not defined by her final hours but by a lifetime of kindness. And although her killer attempted to silence her with duct tape and violence, her memory continues to speak through those who loved her, through the justice system that held her murderer accountable, and through every retelling that honors her humanity.